So we're probably just about ready to get started, actually. I was giving it just an extra minute or so in case there were any other groups finishing off. But I think this session starts dead in the middle of another one. You'll be pleased to know, well, you might be pleased to know, I'm going to take a break from slides, from PowerPoints. This is largely anecdotal, and hopefully there's a chance to have some questions about the future of CPD at TTA as well, at the end of my brief anecdotal input. And it'd be really great as part of that to actually hear your views on what CPD should look like at TTA as well, because very much like I mentioned at the beginning of the day, I'm really keen to make sure everything TTA is doing, particularly on membership service delivery, is something that actually serves your wants and your needs, and helps the sector and the learners that are using the sector as well. But without further ado, just want to start this session thinking about educational theory. So obviously I had a wide array of topics and themes to pick from. And as I was sort of mulling it over, I came down to what I think the single biggest lessons I have learned as an educator, whether that's as a teacher in schools, as a leader of schools, or in the tuition sector, what that biggest lesson is. And I picked something that has an element of feeling behind it. So just to start the session, what I want you to do, because I'm going to get you doing things, is think of a time that you learned something. So think of a time that you learned something, and you're actually going to have to do this, I'm afraid. But think of a time that you learned something as a child. So preferably something academic. Recall the memory, right? So relive it. So while you're thinking about it, think about where you were at the time, who you were with, what age you were, what could you see, what could you hear, what could you smell. And just to get you really thinking about that and reliving that memory, can you tell the people around you or someone next to you about that memory? Talk about it. So sorry to put this back on you, but I just want to give you a minute to do that. Specific memory, please.
Between and it's that people base more that in that I heard then in nothing about Harry lumping and they I hope it's all so I don't know if you up in there's that playing counting shoppers about that and is that these that and if I disappointed, how do I do that? I do things. My spine moves around and I can mouth that now until this to do that. I'm so sure, fully well in the shower, right there, hanging in boots and wild pines. The hour 12 and 11. There was a popcorn beast that I really being hammered, and maybe so I, the last job, that you know what they said, yeah, but if you really, but in nowadays, I take a cup of very good car, send whatever you eat well. Again, I don't mind trying on that out there and I'd call them.
So genuinely, that was a minute. So I said I'd be brief. And does anybody want to share with the entire group their memory? Tell us about it. Anybody? Just throw a hand up. Go for it. Go, Quinks.
I really struggled with long division, and I really others on a blackboard, and I really didn't like the way the chalk felt when the teacher asked me to do it on the blackboard. But I do remember the teacher took time to...
Excellent, that's really interesting, and actually that's a good example of what we're going to talk about later. What would you say specifically was memorable about it? Was it you mentioned about the feeling of the chalk on the blackboard, is that right? Would you say that is what made it memorable?
I know it was the time of the teacher.
It was, okay, fantastic, okay. And how old were you at the time, if you don't mind me asking? 9 or 10, okay, and it was you and the teacher working on that problem together. Fantastic, okay. I just want to very briefly go back to whoever you're talking to for the minute and just ask 2 questions that just clarify or make the memory a bit more specific for them. Just 2 questions, that's like a 10-second job, go for it.
Well, you can't, then at the bottom, just behind your leg, open and time behind Jen, and like it's for in front. What Jen is trying to down. She had done, so she would still playing, we were in binds. His binds, yes, Brady, she needed to go by the devilish one all the time. We were capping up, right binds, in and papers. We knew with these all we had a thing who always me when I get.
Okay, so that's that. So just as a quick show of hands now, thinking about the experiences the experience that we heard, but the experiences you've been hearing as well, and hopefully many of them were academic experiences. I mean, how many of them, when the story was being told, when the memory was being relived, how many of them were focused on the experience And how many of those conversations were focused on the learning? So how many of those focused on an experience within the learning episode, or how many focused on what was learnt? So show of hands, how many of those memories that you heard were an experience, something episodic, something that was about a connection or a feeling or something the same? And how many of those were specifically about something that was learned? Nowhere near as many. Because that very much leads us to the topic of this discussion. If understanding is remembering in disguise, how do we make our tutoring more memorable? And there's two key words in there, and I don't know if you spotted them, but you've got understanding and you've got memorable. Because you see, we think of understanding as an acquisition of knowledge or an application of that knowledge to make a skill. But skill is just applied knowledge. But we tend to think of our memories as experience, and they are two different things. But another question back to you, does experience itself enhance or distract from the acquisition of knowledge? So it's not the morning anymore, your brain's alert, you've had some talks, it's a big question, I know. So does experience enhance or distract from the acquisition of knowledge? I'm putting that back to you to discuss.
Be involved in that much hasn't got like to follow. Very hard in the field, but and people like it in house and yes, and I think should that all being observed on the time. 20. That's and I wasn't that rain and yeah, I don't know this. I was there the two other thing that's the nice thing. This one you kind of yeah, close the day was sitting right the people. Other stitch did that clearly just anger so. Firsthand, they're not in the OTA or not being at all. So I'm not going to say I'm going to be after that shit. And it's just like one night, yeah, I think you're in the very super that sleep that it's 50. And when I was for us to meet out of that, yeah, a few days about them and we're already sleep and spend shit. And I think that was convenient, turning the hour and wake them up.
It's really interesting being up there because I'm hearing bits of the conversations. Yeah. And hopefully your discussions down there, you're getting a lot out of that yourself and starting to see some links here, because we tend to be a lot more conscious of experience. So we're a lot more conscious of the experience when we're recalling something memorable, but it doesn't mean that knowledge or a skill hasn't been attained at the same time, that it hasn't been learnt. Some people would say that it's true that the experience can override the knowledge, but I would argue differently, because I actually think it means quite the opposite. So, for example, another show of hands, I told you I'm going to involve you a lot today. How many of you came in here by train today? Okay, quite a few. How many of you came in by foot to a large degree? Okay, how many of you have been to Westminster before? So you've been in this area of London before today. Just think so, well, how many times, okay? And think back to this morning, as you walked through the wonderful surroundings, those buildings in Westminster, and you got on and off the tube, and you passed the crowded streets or the platforms, and, at some point in that journey, I'm willing to bet that some of you recalled a memory. So for me, as I walked here last night, I remember the first time I was stood outside Westminster Abbey, and that might be the same for you. And it's thinking, just think back to if you are one of those people where that happened, was the memory a happy one? Well, I hope it was. Was it a sad one? I hope it wasn't. But it's probably fair to say that when that memory came back to your mind in that moment, you were conscious of it. Okay, I'm seeing some nods of agreement, so I'm hoping that means yes, you were. That memory came back because you walked through Westminster and you remembered the first time you were there. Maybe you were on the tube, but you remembered a moment from your childhood when you got on and off the tube or were on it for the first time. And you see, that's interesting because in that journey, you also applied an incredible amount of knowledge or skill in that journey. You used prior information that you had learned. You worked out train times, platform numbers. You listened to the announcements on the platform. You stayed behind the yellow line. You knew it was dangerous to go over it. You crossed the road. You checked it was clear. You looked, you listened for traffic, you held your pockets closed to make sure nobody was stealing from them. You read road signs, road names, you probably looked at maps, you might have used your phone, you might have recalled your PIN number on your phone or used Face ID. And you would have done all of these things. I could go on and on and on. You get the picture. The volume of knowledge that you used to get here today was immense, and dare I say, seemingly infinite. And how much of that was conscious? Probably none. Yet the memory of walking past Westminster Abbey, for me, brought back childhood thoughts. And I don't think anybody in the journey here today thought back to the first time they crossed a road as a skill or as a piece of knowledge, but they may very well have thought about some sort of experience into where they were. Maybe it's walking along an embankment, it depends how you came in. We won't get into the technicalities. But both the experience that you recalled and the knowledge or the skills that you consciously did not recall have come from your long-term memory. They've come from the same place. So let's talk about the types of memory for a moment. You see, you've got short-term memory. Your conscious attention is your short-term memory. So your brain is obviously constantly scanning for things unconsciously. And that's why when you hear a word or think of someone you haven't thought about for a long time, they suddenly pop up in your life, or the word pops up in your life numerous times. Does that happen to you? Yeah, so, you hear a name or you hear a word, and then for the next week, suddenly that word or that name is everywhere, or it's a type of car that you're thinking about buying. And that's not because the occurrence becomes more frequent. It's not that at all. It's because the unconscious part of your brain starts scanning for that. And when it's been in your memory recently, it's going to keep bringing it up into your short-term conscious memory. So right now, you're sitting there and you're listening to me. I hope you are. It may not be the case for all of you, but I hope you're listening. At least you can give the attention to listen to me. So for those of you that haven't nodded off yet, you are using your short-term memory. And then next, you've got your working memory. And this is your ability to manipulate that information. It's manipulating your attention, your short-term, it's decoding it. And right now, you're hopefully thinking about what I'm saying. You're making sense of it. That might mean making notes. It might be engaging with it in the conversations that you've already had. But either way, you're linking it to what you already know. You're spotting contradictions. You're evaluating how you feel about this session. You're making opinions on it. Do you like it? Do you like me? Do you not like it? Do you not like me? Do you agree with what I'm saying, etc.? It can go on and on and on. So this is your working memory, and that is the gateway to the long-term memory. It's why half of teaching and tutoring is questions that you ask. You want to put information in someone's head and you want them to think about it, because the more you remember, the more you learn. And that's where we want the information to go with our tutors. We want it to go into the long-term memories. Because if it's in the short term, it's not learned. When it's in the long term, it is learned, and it is as simple as that. So within that long-term memory, and this is where it gets a bit complicated, and you're probably going to wish there were slides. There's 3 types of memory within your long term. There's procedural, right? So that's a non-decorative function. So it's something like 37 times 16. So, can anyone do that for me right now? In fact, fastest thinker. 37 times 16. Feel free to use paper if you want. Somebody solve that. Anyone? No? Okay. As I say, sounding a little high. I haven't actually... Mine? What have you got? Hard for the 2. I've got 592. Well done. There you go. There's no prize, unfortunately. Sorry. But 592. So look, a procedure was just followed. Whether you were doing it mentally, regardless of whether you got to the end of it, you were following a procedure, or maybe you had the help of a pad or the pen. But the procedure led you to the answer. You didn't know the answer. You weren't able to recall it, but you could recall the procedure and the steps in order to get there. So that's the non-decorative function in the long-term memory. Okay, but you've also got 2 decorative functions. So this is your explicit memory. So the first of those is episodic, and that's your experiences. And then there's semantics, and that's your recall of concepts. Effectively, that's just language. So even if you're recalling number box, 5 and 5 makes 10, for example, you've effectively learned that through the acquisition of language. So albeit in that example, mathematical language and numerical language is language. Okay, so those, that's 2 types of decorative function in your long-term memory. So another question for you. What role does experience play in your tuition sessions? So experience is half of that declarative function, half of that explicit memory in your long term. So it's half of the learning. So in what ways can you use experiences to provide or to help learning for your tutees? I'm genuinely putting that question back out to you. So what role does experience play in your tuition sessions?
It's using the tutees' experience as facilitators, and then in terms of the subject matter, tutor archives and business, and providing that they can, for example, tutees interested what imaginary business might they run and start developing apps as a learning things.
When the tutee recalls that session, is that what they're going to remember episodically? Is that the experience they're going to remember? It's not a direct change. It's just, that's just for you to answer, not for me to criticise at all. But is that what the tutee will remember in relation to that learning point? And I'm certainly not saying no. There is no right or wrong here. This is, like I say, it's anecdotal. It's just my thoughts on an education theory, on learning sciences, and on neuroscience. Has anybody got anything else they want to say on that?
So I've mentioned it before, but I believe multi-sensory learning means that we can access it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, you can build the elements using skittles and marshmallows or electrons because it's like in light, as opposed to sigils which are heavier and then what happens.
So that's theory. So yep. Okay. Fantastic. Yep.
For some of my primary students, where they did fraction these are they always ask when they do max coded fraction scale.
Yeah, but the top that. Yeah.
They remember how to do your fractions because we have them, and it's physical. They touch it, then you see it, they eat it afterward. But that's the memory that the student.
Okay, so would you say they're linking in the experience to the actual knowledge that they've learned? So, with fractions work, right? It's just a discussion point, but when those students in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, recall their knowledge of fractions or use or apply their knowledge of fractions, do you think they're going to remember the experience? Okay. So there's a link that we haven't mentioned yet, but I think you sort of tapped upon it, and that is emotions, because emotions have an evolutionary purpose, obviously, depending on who you speak to, of course. But emotions play an important role in memory. So think of it in terms of what we know about PTSD, which, by the way, I'm not qualified to understand clinically at all. But a reductionist would explain that with PTSD, a traumatic event is linked with an emotion. And when the emotion or the memory links that emotion is replayed, it becomes very vivid for the person experiencing it again, incredibly vivid. The memory becomes so relived to an extent that it is as if it is happening again. And that's what PTSD is. So that's just an example of the extreme of how an emotion can work with memory. It's like it's happening all over again. And you see, when I was completing my PGCE, undertaking my teacher training, it's well over 10 years ago now. And I remember our course director, quite close to the end of the course, she was speaking to all of us, and she said something along the lines of, and I wrote it down here, if I have taught you one thing this year, it's this. And she's referring to the children we were about to go out into the world to teach. She said, they won't remember what you say, but they will remember how you make them feel. Now, I didn't fully comprehend that at the time. Well, I did, but I forgot. But it did come back to me some years later, and here's why. So I'll tell you a story about something that's happened to me quite recently. I was out at a local bar. It was a few months ago, and it was at the beginning of the summer. And that doesn't happen often, actually, going out to bars, because I'm married and I've got 2 young children. So honestly, it really was a treat. And I was out there with a few friends, and just as we were leaving, and it got quite late, this guy, huge guy, stumbles over to us, and it's like, we know what that spells like. There's about to be trouble, and he spreads his arms and he throws his arms out. So you can imagine, like, oh god, here we go. And as he does so, he grapples me into a hug, and he goes, Mr. Corbitt, you were the best teacher we ever had. And it turns out that I taught this guy in year 3. And, generally I've got a good, a good memory for faces. So I do remember him. And so I got into conversation. I said, well, what was your favourite memory then? Why did you say that? What made me the best teacher you ever had? And he said, I didn't have one. He just said we had so much fun and you used to make us laugh. And I remember it because it was fun and that laughter was shared. So then a few weeks later, this is further into the summer, so a couple of months ago, I was at a wedding, and it was a close friend's wedding, so I was asked to deliver a speech, and I delivered the speech. It wasn't best man or anything, but, I put a humorous spin on it. And, I nailed it. I nailed the speech. Everyone was laughing. It was hilarious. And, it really was. Not so much like this one. But look, out of the crowd came this young lad, and it's sort of a similar experience. And this time I recognised him first. And I taught him some years before. He came up to me and he goes, Mr. Corbitt, you're so funny. And I said, thanks. And, I said something along the lines of, I'm glad you enjoyed my lessons, to which he replied, he goes, no. I mean, you're funny now. In school, we thought you were all right. And I won't finish that sentence, okay? Okay. But it sort of emphasised the point, you see, in both those examples, two extremes. They won't remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel. But seriously, I'm not sure it is quite right to think of it like that, to think that, I think that we're just conscious of the experience, because experiences tend to be unique. When you recall an experience, you're thinking of a scene that was unique and at the time, even if it's somewhere that you've been to or someone you're with multiple times. Whereas knowledge tends to be repetitive. Learning without experience is just boring. That's why it takes so much longer to remember something mundane. So I think both are needed, and injecting emotion into your tuition is like supercharging the experience, and as a consequence, supercharging the learning. So whether it's humour or building a trusting professional relationship where there's empathy or sympathy, at times, emotion can enhance our learning experiences. So how do we bring emotion into our tutoring sessions? And that's just another 1-minute break to discuss it. How can you bring emotion appropriately into your tuition sessions? That's over to you. And discuss that amongst yourselves, so don't shout out in front of everyone right now.
Those is separating the other already how much feel like at such reality. And looking at it along, what is this still accountable hours though? They're about just student level and I was just talking about one thing I was trying to figure out the rest what I was and I didn't really sure the little I acted it out when I know it and one of them said to me, make closer to me shall not remember that you're doing a shaband because it may be love or and again I can't like that was the thing it's so we didn't sure I think in the video, I think a little about how to carry to speed because that's quite the fundamental about it. And where the just you attempt to run by when I'm with you around the way with the nose I'm bringing not the behind. Yeah,
we're doing the road.
Yeah, true. Then we're about true, and that's true. But yeah, 22 and never one family. Anyways, yeah, about. I know that's the same to their hand. But there are these, and I guess the wired carbon, a few authentically, and opinion, like a doggy.
So I really hate to break up conversation, particularly I can hear it's, you're very well engaged in it. So I'm sorry about that, but just in the interest of moving, time along, before I wrap up the session, I want to leave you with something memorable as well. I would need a couple of volunteers. I'm going to take 2 groups actually. So I'm going to go with just the first 5 people on this side and the first 5 people on this side. I've got some cards here, so I'm going to ask these people here to do is I'm going to give these first 5 people in this group one of these cards, or it's scrappy bits of paper that I've literally just written while you were talking. I'm going to give 1 each. Okay, so you are not allowed to share what's on the paper with anybody. Nobody in your group, nobody at 2. So you can come together as a group for 1 week and stay there, okay, but you're not to share it with anyone else in your group. Is that what you said?
Yeah, thought of the wall. The kills, and then half we got everything. Either rain and that, but little.
So make sure you take the shape, just the for a room. Now the group on this side, I'm going to give you 5 different bits of from card here. Paper. Okay, but what I would like you to do is just very briefly, once you get your card, just stand up over into this space here, and you can very quietly, without anyone else hearing, talk to each other about what we've got. Yeah, it might just be ears of space. Don't stick to random. It's not a trapdoor or anything like that, don't worry. Because that would be an experience. There we go. Yeah, you can go and share with your group. You can show each other what you've got. These guys are keeping their cards secrets. So you can head over there.
Do it. That's my time. All I do our community is a little friend company. It's still get right. Very tempted.
So whilst this group are just having a discussion, let me explain something. Because you see, I've used this idea of, well, I've used the words information and knowledge interchangeably in this talk today, but I just wondered if anybody knows the difference between information and knowledge. Does anybody know? I mean, there's no set definition. I mean, let's find out. So if I was to ask this group down here, collectively, what have you got? Or if I ask just an individual here in this group, what have you got? What have you got? You've got a letter. Would you say the same? You've got a letter. If I go to this group over here and I say, by the way, they both have exactly the same thing. They have exactly the same thing. This group have a letter. What do you have? You have a word. What is that word?
The word is learn.
Okay. So this group have a letter. This group have a learn. But they both have exactly the same thing. And you see, and feel free to sit down for a minute. You see, information is absolutely nothing without connections. Group 1 over here, that was just information. That's Google. Okay, information out there, it's not connected, it's just all over the place. But group 2, that was learning because they had connections. There was a connection between the bits of information. They bridged the gap, those connections. They bridged it. So connections always do that. And whether it's the axon terminals making synaptic connections to other nerve cells, or whether it's the emotional connections that you make with your tutees, with your learners, it will lead to knowledge. And when that knowledge is applied, that then becomes a skill. So why is this important? It's important because the more you know, the more you can know. So I'll just let that sink in for a second. The more you know, the more you can know. You see, the more information and existing connections you have, the more connections you will be able to make. So it's lunchtime. All I do now is challenge you to go out there and make some connections with your learners now. Thank you very much, and I really hope this has been useful.